Hello, I'm Ella and I'm here today to give you a very brief introduction to Shakespeare. Maybe you fancied reading Shakespeare for a long time, maybe you studied him at school and you really fancy having another go, or perhaps you're already into Shakespeare and you'd like to have more of an overview of all of the plays. Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays when he was alive 400 years ago. He wrote 37 in total, that we know about at least. And some of these plays are really popular still today. Many of them are performed very regularly. People study them, and people also quote him a lot too. So here are a few of the ones that I feel really drawn to, and I'll tell you a little bit about what the plays are about and what I find exciting about them, and maybe that'll help you to see which ones you fancy starting first. So this is Hamlet, which is a play that you've probably heard of, and if not, you probably know some of the quotes from it. We have "to be or not to be," "what a rogue and peasant slave am I," a few different quotes that are very popular still. Hamlet is a tragedy, which kind of means that everybody dies at the end. Shortly before the play begins, Hamlet's father has died, and Hamlet's mother, who is the queen, has remarried her husband's brother, so Hamlet's uncle. So we have this situation where the court is kind of in a state of grief, but also it's celebrating a wedding which happened very soon after a funeral. So it's all a little bit strange. And at the beginning of the play, Hamlet's father, who is also called Hamlet, just to be confusing there, comes to Hamlet as a ghost, and he tells him that he was murdered, and he was murdered by his brother, and that Hamlet has to enact revenge on his behalf. And so the rest of the play is Hamlet trying to come to terms with his father's death and what's happened, but also trying to get his uncle to admit what he's done and to get his mother to see what her new husband has done to her previous husband. Yeah, as I said, in the end, everybody dies. A Midsummer Night's Dream is the next one on my list, and this is a much happier play. It's a comedy, which, as well as having various things to do with genre and structure, it's a happier play. It's funny, not all the way through. There are some more kind of serious parts, but overall, it's a really nice play. It begins in the court of Athens, where we see an arranged marriage taking place, or the arrangements for this marriage, but the lovers aren't in love with the right people. So they run away into the forest, and while things all go a little bit haywire, there's fairies who are enacting their own kind of mischief, and on the order of his master, Puck, who is a fairy, gives some of the lovers a love potion, and that makes them even more complicated in terms of the love triangle. So everyone's in love with the wrong person, and then on top of that we have this group of they're kind of workmen who they're amateur performers in this instance. They really, really want to put on a play. They're trying really hard. They don't quite understand how playing works. They haven't seen many by the look of it, but they're taking it really seriously. And when it all comes together at the end, when people get married, we have the fairyland all figures itself out, the real world kind of figures itself out, and we have this group of amateur performers putting on this hilarious failure of a play. And it's really worth a read and a watch. So there's Midsummer Night's Dream. Give that one a go. Romeo and Juliet is another play that you've almost definitely heard about, may well have studied at school. It's a very famous romance. It's another tragedy. Everybody dies. The idea behind Romeo and Juliet is there are two young people, Romeo and Juliet, and they fall in love, but they're from different families who have been at war with each other for a long time, and so they can never really be together. And the play, we see them meet, we see them fall in love, knowing the whole time that they're from different families and that it will just won't work. Very emotional, you may well cry. Romeo and Juliet. Julius Caesar is another very popular play. A slightly different one, this one. We're set in ancient Rome this time. So we have Julius Caesar, who is a major figure in ancient Rome, and the play is about the assassination of Caesar. And what happens afterwards and what happens in the run-up to this assassination. So what's really interesting about this play, it's called Julius Caesar, but who you would think to be kind of the main character, Julius Caesar, is killed off around halfway through. And so he is not present for the second half of the play at all, which might be a bit confusing. But like I said, what's interesting about the play is that it actually plays around with the kind of morals around what's happened and why it's happened and what happens as a result of the assassination. So there's a group of conspirators who are the other powerful people in Rome, and they come together and they feel that Caesar is getting too powerful and it would be best for the nation if he was removed. And so his former friends and colleagues decide that the best thing to do for the people would be to assassinate Caesar. But then what we see after the assassination is we see this group of people trying to come to terms with what they've done, and also, Rome kind of begins to fall apart and democracy falls apart as well. So finally, here is Henry V. This is the last one I'm going to talk about today. Henry V is a history play, which means that Shakespeare actually tells a historical story. He adapts stories that existed at the time, and he tells us about familiar historical figures. And this play is about King Henry V, which makes a lot of sense by the title. And it's actually the third play in a trilogy. We actually see King Henry when he's a prince before he becomes king, and that's in plays called Henry IV Part 1 and Henry IV Part 2. And that's the story of Prince Henry, or Prince Hal as we know him at that point, coming of age, becoming an adult and really learning how to rule. And then in Henry V we see him at his prime. We see him, it's the war between England and France, and we see him winning the Battle of Agincourt. So we see battle scenes, we see some really intimate court scenes as well, and at the end we see him fall in love with his then wife. So it's a really, it's a good play, it's a really solid play, that one. Definitely worth a read. What I love most about Shakespeare, I think, is the stories themselves. It's the way that when I think about each Shakespeare play, I get a really strong impression of what it's about and the story itself and the characters that are part of that story. And I think something that always amazes me is how current all of these stories still feel and how relatable the characters still are, even though they were written so long ago. And I think that's what really appeals to a lot of people, and it's also why Shakespeare is still so popular today. If you go into the theatre, there is very, very often a Shakespeare play or several being staged, and it's because there are so many recognisable problems being looked at in the plays, and that's partly why we still read them and why we still study them today, and why we can still get benefit from them. Shakespeare really does different things for different people. If you fancy one of the plays I've told you about today, then try reading it, and if you enjoy that, try reading another one. You could follow similar genres, so if you enjoy Hamlet, you could try King Lear, which is another one of Shakespeare's epic tragedies that are for many people his best play. If you enjoy reading A Midsummer Night's Dream, you could try Twelfth Night, which is another kind of love triangle comedy with shipwrecks and all kinds of things. And if you enjoy Henry V, try Richard III or one of Shakespeare's other history plays, because he's written lots of those as well. So there are so many options. Have a look at some of the blurbs of the plays online. If you see a film, try watching that and see if you enjoy the story and the language as well. And if you see it advertised as well, go and see it live, because one of my favourite things to do is to see Shakespeare live. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got a favourite play, post it in the comments below. It'd be great to hear what you think. And happy reading. Thank you very much. Bye bye.